Convincing and Persuading Man. After making the last video, I wanted to continue my meditation from verse 5 of Act 18, but I was brought back to verse 4, which says, "And he," that is Paul, "reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks." Act 18, verse 4. The Lord reminded me of the following verse, "For the Jews require a sign, and the Greeks seek after wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, unto the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Greeks foolishness." 1 Corinthians 1, 22-23. How did Paul manage to persuade these fierce enemies of Christ? The Jews firmly believed that Christ deserved crucifixion because he claimed to be God. See John 10:33. Therefore, believing that Christ was the Messiah was and still is blasphemy for most Jews. To the Greeks, Paul was no Solomon, and his message of Christ crucified was foolishness. However, thanks to Paul's preaching, they acknowledged that they were sinners, that Christ was the Messiah, and the highest wisdom, and that they would be eternally condemned by God's tribunal on Judgment Day if they stood before Christ with their own righteousness, that is, without his perfect righteousness. They believed in their heart that God raised Christ from the dead. See Romans 10, verse 10. This is crucial because just like demons, see Mark chapter 1, verse 24, and chapter 5, verse 7, there are people who confess that Jesus is Lord, the Son of God, without Christ being their life, as Paul declared by saying, "For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." Philippians 1:21. From the abundance of his heart, Thomas said to Christ, "My Lord and my God." John 20, verse 28. Unlike hypocrites, true believers confess Christ from the bottom of their hearts. See Luke 6:45. To convince and persuade these Jews and Greeks then, two things were needed. First, Paul told no jokes, nor resorted to philosophy, fear, or a good sermon on human conduct. He stuck to the faithful preaching of Christ, that is, the pure and simple truth about his nature, his perfect obedience, his death, and his resurrection, as well as the truth about the sinfulness of man, who is nothing without Christ and can do nothing to be righteous before God. See John 15, verse 5. Second, it is written, "And when he, that is the Spirit of Christ, is come, he will reprove the world of sin and of righteousness and of judgment." See John 16, verse 8. Paul didn't convince and persuade these people. Christ did through him, because to be convinced and persuaded, a fallen being like man needs a new heart, and that operation can only be performed by the Spirit of Christ, who gives life to spiritually dead men. See John 6:63. It wasn't by Paul's intellectual might, nor by his strength, but by the Spirit of Christ. Thanks to him, those who sincerely love the Lord study his word to become workmen of Christ. By his grace, they endeavor, like Paul, to never stray from the word of truth, that is, Christ, according to 2 Timothy 2, verse 15, because only the word of his honor and glory saves sinners. Come to Christ.